and they're three men called Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And these three men had been taken to Babylon, where God wasn't really worshipped, and they were under the domain of King Nebuchadnezzar, a very long name, very powerful king. And so they had been taken from Israel, and now they had to live and work for the king in Babylon. And the king was a very powerful man, he was a very proud man, and so he decided that he ought to build something to show how important he was. Anybody know what he built to show how important he was? He built a big idol, he did. Let's have a look at this big idol, shall we? He decided he was going to build a big golden image. Now we're not quite sure whether it was of one of his gods, or maybe it was an image of himself, because he was very pleased with himself and very proud of all that he had done. So I've got my big golden image here. It looks a bit like an Academy Award, doesn't it? Also looks a bit like Bart Simpson at the top. So that's probably not what the king had in mind. But so here we have this 90-foot golden statue. And the king said that I want everybody who works for me, all the ministers and all the officials in the government and in the palace, everybody must come along and bow down and worship this great big image that I've made. Now the three men, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, they had a bit of a problem with that because they believed in God. And there were two reasons why they thought we're not going to really be able to do this very easily. Is it good to make statues and images of gold of ourselves? It's not, is it? And is it good to bow down to things like that? No, it's not. Because the Bible says the first two commandments, remember the 10 commandments of God? The first one that God says is you shall have no other gods except me. And the second commandment that God says is nobody should build an idol or an image and then bow down to it. He says those are two things that God really hates. And that's what King Nebuchadnezzar was asking all these people to do. So I wonder what they did. Well, all the people who worked for King Nebuchadnezzar, because he was such a powerful king and because he was quite a scary king, they all went along to the image and they did exactly what he said they should do. So here we are, right up close now at the base of this great big image, and here are all the officials and all the government ministers. They're all bowing down in worship at this great big idol. And I've noticed there's a little space I've left here because that's where Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego are going to go. What do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're going to bow down and worship as well? What do you think they're going to do? Well, they're going to get thrown in the furnace. Okay. Again, you're a bit ahead of me. Because sometimes we get asked to do things that we don't really want to do. Sometimes people say, I demand that you do this thing. And in your mind, you know it's wrong. But because everybody else is doing it, and because we're told that if we don't do it, we're going to get in trouble, sometimes we feel, well, we better do it. It's like peer pressure, isn't it? That's the word, peer pressure. When we feel we have to do something because everybody else is doing it. So even though all these other people were bowing down and worshipping this idol, the three men had their wheelbarrow moment. Were they going to trust God and put their faith in God? Or were they going to say, you know what, just to keep quiet and just to make life easy for ourselves, we're going to do what everybody else does. After all, we live in Babylon and that's what people in Babylon do. What did the three men do? Did they bow down or did they stay standing? Let's have a look. They refused to bow down. They decided they were going to remain standing and choose to obey God rather than obey the king. Ted said something this morning in Sunday school. He said this, it's good not to be in trouble with God. It's good not to be in trouble with God. And they decided they would rather die and make sure that their relationship with God was good rather than do something that God hated just so that they could carry on living for a bit longer. When the king found out that these three men wouldn't bow down, he was furious. And so he summoned them to come to talk to him. And he said, I'm going to give you one last chance. If you don't bow down and worship this big idol, you're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace, as Anna's told us. And you know what? This is what they say to the king, and I love this. Listen to this. They answer the king and say, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They believed that God would deliver them from the furnace. But they say to the king, you know, even if he doesn't deliver us, we're still not going to bow down and worship your idol. We'd rather die and serve God than bow down to this thing that you have made. Well, the king is furious, and so he decides that there's only one answer for these three men. He's going to throw them into the fire. But before he does that, he's so furious, he says, I want the fire to be heated up 7 times hotter than usual. So even while they're still wearing their cloaks and their hats, the Bible says that these 3 men are tied up and they're thrown into this fiery furnace. Let's see what happens to these 3 men, shall we? Now, the thing about the furnace was that it was so hot that even the guards who were carrying them tied up and bound, even those who were carrying them to the furnace, they were killed by the heat. That shows how hot the furnace was. So what happened to these 3? If the guards were killed before they even got to the furnace, what happened to these 3 men? Let's just show us here, shall we? See them all there? They're just standing there. They're walking around. The ropes that tied them up, they're not tying them up anymore. They're able just to walk around untied and unharmed by the fire. And the king looks at that and he says, that's incredible. That's amazing, because he can see into this furnace. He can watch them moving around, and he says, I can't believe what's happening. But he's not just amazed by that, he's amazed by something else as well. Because it's not just the 3 men that he sees in the furnace. Someone else is in there as well. Who's it? God or an angel? We're not quite sure. But you know, the Bible says that Nebuchadnezzar, he says, did we not throw 3 men tied up into the furnace? How is it then that I see 4 men walking around in the furnace untied, and one of them looks like a son of the gods? He says it's an angel or a son of the gods. Well, it might be. But you know, I thought to myself, who is it who helps people to lose the things that tie them up? Who is it that keeps people from the fire? Who is it who sometimes gets described as a son, not of the gods, but a son of the God? Who do you think that might be? God's power. It's Jesus, isn't it? It might have been Jesus. And another reason I think it might have been Jesus is because the Bible tells us that Jesus takes the punishment and the suffering that we deserve. You know, I think while he was in there, all the heat that was killing the guards and all that heat 7 times hotter, I think it all went to this person so that these people didn't have to suffer. And that would fit in, wouldn't it, with what we know about Jesus, because when he went to the cross, we remember that he didn't die there for things he'd done wrong, but he took all our pain and all our punishment upon himself so that we didn't have to suffer. And so these 3 men, Nebuchadnezzar the king, he frees them and he promotes them in the land, but he also says this, he says, may no one ever say anything against anything that the God that Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego believe in. May nobody ever say a word against that God. And of course that's the same God that we believe in as well. And it reminds me that God says if we trust in him and if we put our faith in him, he will deliver us. Now there are times in life, in history, where people have believed in God and they've been faithful to God and they've died for their faith. But on this occasion, we're told that God delivers these people. And it's not just for our faith and our relationship with God that we remain faithful to God. It's also because other people will watch what God might do in our lives if we remain faithful to God when sometimes perhaps we're tempted not to.